Thousands of families race to register for Texas's new school choice program, which looks like it might soon hit this year's cap of about 90,000 students. A good problem, but one that universal choice is also facing in other states such as Tennessee. Meantime, after the Mississippi House passes a bill to join the school choice revolution, the state Senate derails it.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the Journal's opinion pages, Kim Strassel and Nicole Alt. Applications on Wednesday opened for Texas's new K-12 education savings account program, and about 42,000 families already signed up on that first day. By Friday, it was 60,000. And so it looks like the state might soon hit the cap based on the amount of funding that is available of about 90,000 students. Kim, first things first, it seems like great credit here needs to go to Republican Governor Greg Abbott. Remember, we've talked about on previous podcasts, this school choice ESA plan was at first voted down by Republicans in the state legislature, at least a handful of Republicans. Greg Abbott then picked some Republican primary fights and won many of those fights. And the result now is a law that he signed, this education savings account program that is about to go operational and benefit tens of thousands of families. It seems like, really carried it over the line.
Yeah, all that pent up demand that you are seeing soaring in these numbers, I think really is a commendation both of the policy that not just Greg Abbott, but the Republicans in his state legislature put through and put into effect, but also the politics of this. That 2023 race was not necessarily an easy decision for Abbott to make. And I think people need to remember that. And that's in part because several of the Republicans who had joined with the Democrats in the legislature to stop this school choice program, these were not necessarily Republicans who, are rhinos who act like lefties, et cetera. Many of them were very solidly ideologically Republican. They just happened to be anti-choice on school issues because many of them represented rural districts whose school districts function pretty well for them, in that the parents are much more involved in terms of the control of school boards, more interaction with the teachers. And their attitude was representative of the parents in their areas. Well, we don't really need charter schools. We don't need private school choice in our areas. But if we pass this bill, it could siphon money out of our good public school that we happen to like at the moment. So in that way, it put them in the same place as Democrats. And there was a lot of controversy within the party about whether to challenge them in a primary. Mr. Abbott stepped up. He endorsed the primary challengers to those lawmakers. It was very much a single issue question. That campaign was successful. He needed to win about 76 seats out of 150 in the Texas House to enact this plan. He ended up with 79 votes. The pure lesson that was sent to those that have been defeated was enough to actually scare 88 members of the House into totally voting for his plan and getting it over the line in the end. The one controversy, as you note, Kyle, is that while it's the largest school choice plan in the country by numbers, certainly by funding, Texas is a really huge state, so it's still not anywhere near large enough to manage all of the demand that is clearly pouring in. And there's going to be a lot of, unfortunately, disappointed kids who don't make the cutoff this year.
Nicole, you follow the arguments over school choice pretty closely. Where do you think we are now, larger picture in the country? Are we near maybe a building a turning point? 19 states, I think, now have universal school choice laws, meaning there's not any eligibility criteria that exclude any student. Any family that wants to participate can participate, again, as long as there is funding available. They might end up on a wait list. But are we getting to a point where there's a real build in these school choice numbers?
Yeah, I think it's really significant that you see that many states with universal programs. That's a big jump even from just a few years ago. And you really saw that shift during and after the pandemic years. So that's a big deal. But it is important to remember that a lot of these quote unquote universal programs, like you mentioned, they're universal because anybody is eligible, but they can't technically serve all students who may want to apply or want to use a scholarship because they are limited in funding. And so you see that, for example, in Tennessee last year, 40,000 students applied for the program, but it has a 20,000 student cap. Or in Louisiana, lawmakers funded 6,000 ESAs, but that left thousands of families unable to get them. So you're seeing this demand, which is really significant. And that's another important point about school choice is that parents aren't forced to choose school choice. It's a choice for them. And when you're seeing these kinds of numbers, it shows that the policy is worth it. But yeah, I think this is a turning point. But the next question is, can lawmakers fund these programs so that anybody who wants an ESA can get one?
Some overall figures, these are from the group Ed Choice. It says that about 1.5 million students are now using private school choice in the 2025-2026 school year, up from about 1.2 million last year. So an increase of about 300,000. And then Kim, on the point about the funding mechanism, I mean, there is something accomplished by states making the programs universal, even if there is some kind of funding or enrollment cap that means that everybody who wants to participate is not able to. And one thing I think it might do is change the debate, change the dynamics of the politics around it. It's a different sort of argument to expand eligibility to somebody than it is when you go to the state legislature and you say, here's this program that we have, and look at all the people on the wait list. Look at all the families. Here are the families. You can bring them to the state capitol and say, here are people who would like to participate. Here are the reasons that their local traditional public school is not working for them. Maybe some of them have learning disabilities or whatnot, and they, as the parents, as the families making the choice, think that this program, this state ESA program or what have you, would work for them, and they cannot get it. And I think that is the politics that we're now seeing play out in states like Tennessee, and maybe before long we'll have a similar kind of dynamic in Texas.
Yeah. Look, for someone like me who's actually been writing about this for decades, and I still remember the days when we would write editorials and we were trying to suggest to people that it would be okay to just open a charter school or two in one failing city. To see this happening is just remarkable and amazing. And the big point, as you just note, is that what you are doing is creating a constituency, and that constituency then has a vested interest in tooling around the edges and modifying and bettering these programs in a way. The obvious one is that there needs to be more funding for some of these. And some states have become smarter about that. You've had states that are now funding their ESAs outside of annual appropriations. Those are states like Arizona and Arkansas, and that does help because it means that there's you're looking at it as a different category rather than balancing it against, versus like educating kids versus paving roads, which is some of the decisions that get made in the annual appropriations process. But putting it in its own area and evaluating it as a standalone item can be really smart. There needs to be some work on boosting scholarship amounts as well. That has been an issue because oftentimes those are capped too. And they're often about half of what parents really need to get their kids into, for instance, a decent private school in their area. One thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but it'll be interesting to see how it happens, is this new scholarship program that the federal government sort of got rolling with reconciliation, that it's meant to encourage family members, but also larger donors in states to put money into some of these scholarship programs that are getting up and going. We'll see how big of a philanthropic sort of quest that becomes in certain areas. That there's a lot that, that there also needs to be, just as we're talking about tooling around the edges, states also need to be working more now that they've got these programs in place to make sure that the parents are permitted to really use the dollars for a whole means of expenses. Then that might include homeschooling, textbooks, the micro school phenomenon that's been rolling out there. There's a lot of different possibilities. And what we're finding is that choice produces a lot of models, and that means a lot of competition, and you need to be encouraging all different elements of that. So we're now talking about how to make this better. And as you know, what we've now got is literally hundreds of thousands of kids and their parents who have every reason to be making sure that this gets better. And that's an enormous difference from just even a few years ago.
Jumping off that point about the scholarship amounts, the amount of money that gets put into these ESAs or other programs, Nicole, part of what has been a political difficulty, I think, the opposition from teachers' unions in particular to even the creation of any kind of program like this, one way that states have dealt with that is by giving the school choice participants only a fraction of the per pupil amount of the funding that traditional public schools receive. So notably, there was a survey last year of parents in Florida who received an ESA, an education savings account, and then didn't use it. And nearly 20% said that the reason they didn't use it is that it wasn't enough to cover the tuition that they wanted at a private school. And so do you see that dynamic changing any as parents and numbers? Do you see that dynamic changing any as more parents get signed up for these kinds of programs, giving state lawmakers maybe the courage needed to say, actually, we're going to let the full amount of the money follow the student. We're not going to, if a student participates in the school choice program, we're not going to let the traditional K-12 school they're leaving, which might be a failing public school, keep a chunk of that money. We're going to let all of the money go wherever the student is going.
I do think you might see that shift as you do see more of this demand for school choice. If parents, like in this Florida survey, can't use the ESAs for what they're supposed to be used for, then lawmakers should feel the pressure to increase the funding for scholarship amounts. The Private School Review estimates that national average private school tuition is around $15,000. The average ESA amount is somewhere around $7,000. And it's also much less than the average per pupil spending in public schools. So, that really is something for lawmakers to look at.
Kim, you also mentioned this new federal program for funding school choice. And the interesting story that's been playing out and will continue to play out this year is questions, particularly for Democratic governors, whether they're going to participate. So far, really only one has said that he is on board. That is Governor Jared Polis in Colorado. And his thinking, it seems to me, shows the dilemma in that Democratic governors tend to not to like school choice as a general matter. But if they decline to participate in this new federal funding program, people in their states can donate money to other states and get the same sort of tax write-off. And so Polis, in a recent interview this week with the news site The 74, he suggested this. I think most, if not all, Democratic governors will get there as they learn about the chance to boost charitable contributions in their state. If there are states that don't, for some reason, people in those states can still give to charities in states like Colorado. And so he thinks that when push comes to shove, his Democratic colleagues, I don't know, maybe Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania will decide that they would prefer to participate in this than to let the money flow elsewhere. And I don't know about that, particularly if a guy like Josh Shapiro wants to have national Democratic progressive appeal in 2028.
Well, that's a question facing Democrats, and it's not one I envy them. And I actually think if you read between the lines, when Polis says, I think more Democrats will get there, what he's actually suggesting is not that they'll actually come to love the policy, but rather that they're beginning to understand that politically, this is proving a very bad issue for them. Because one aspect of that new constituency we're talking about are a lot of parents of kids who see these more options And it's inspiring them to vote for Republicans and to trust Republicans more on the education issue. And notably, there are actually Democratic polling groups like DFBR and Blue Rose Research that have got research out showing that now, despite Democrats' historical advantage on the question of education, more of the public is beginning to trust Republicans to handle the education issue. And given that education is usually an enormous question on voters' minds when they go to the polls, that should be very worrying to Democrats. There are kind of two problems right now that I worry about when it comes to the continued growth and benefit of school choice programs. One is litigation from teachers' unions. They continue to sue to try to stop school choice if they can't block it in the legislature. And we're seeing that play out. We just had an Idaho Supreme Court ruling against the teachers' unions in a lawsuit against that state's tax credit scholarship program. There's also been lawsuits in Ohio and Tennessee, Wyoming, and Utah, and we'll see how those work out. But those teachers' unions are meanwhile putting enormous pressure, and they have a lot of money that they give in elections on Democrats to toe the line on this issue. And that is really tearing Democrats in two, especially because, and I want to throw this in here, Republicans, not only are they creating choice programs, but some of the smarter states are also doing this to prove that it does not necessarily have to mean bad things happen to public education, which has always been the argument against these and what the teachers unions have used. I would note that, Arkansas, for instance, when it created its new Freedom Account programs, which covers private school tuition and tutoring expenses, it also boosted the minimum teacher salary in public schools from $36,000 to $50,000. And it launched a new education program to help repay teachers' federal student loans and created a new merit incentive fund to offer bonuses for eligible teachers that do a good job in the classroom. And all of this, when you add this up, the growth of school choice, and then initiatives like that prove to voters that the intention here is not to destroy public schools, but rather to better and to give more competition across the board. That is really putting Democrats on the back foot. And it's probably the main reason why guys like Polis are open to at least taking some steps on these, scholarships. There's no skin off his nose. The state isn't necessarily paying for this, but simply allowing the program to go forward. That's one way to get a little bit of credit. He will face huge blowback, as will other Democrats from teachers unions. That's a decision they're going to have to make at some point.
But there continue to be those cross-cutting arguments against school choice, as we saw in Texas, about people in rural areas where they don't have a lot of private schools operating, who think, what's in it for me? And maybe Mississippi is another good example. The Mississippi House in January passed a bill similar to kind of the Texas model. Education savings accounts could go to thousands of students starting in year 2027. That has now been derailed by the Mississippi Senate. And let's give a flavor of that debate. First, here is Mississippi House Speaker Jason White on Super Talk Mississippi.
Now, some were surprised at our vote in the House on the issue. We had 59 Republicans vote for that bill out of 78. That basically tracks what the polling shows for Republican primary voters, about 85%. It polls off the chart.
Yeah.
You can find very few issues that poll that high, especially dealing with Republican primary voters. But those numbers almost hold up across all parties and socioeconomic factors when it comes to school choice. This notion that it shuts down public schools or drains money from public schools, if that happened in Mississippi as a result of our, what I would call a measured small step in the direction of choice, if that happened, we would be the first state where that happened. Every other state where they have some form of school choice, the take rates are very low, but all families are more satisfied and all education systems are better.
And here is Senate President Pro Tem Dean Kirby on Mississippi Today.
Well, we couldn't find anyone for it, to be honest with you. The public schools weren't for it, and I'm talking about all public schools, even the not just the A schools were against it, but the B, C, D, and what few F schools we have were against it, and all the private schools were against it. And so we couldn't find anyone for it. to be honest with you. No one wanted that particular bill. So now I know that I heard that there was a poll done at one time, and I guarantee you I could run a poll and make anything look good in a poll. I mean, if you ask a question like, are you for the parents making a decision of where to send their kids to school? Or are you for the state government telling you where to send your kids? Well, they're all going to say, well, I'm for decide, so it's a push polls don't mean anything.
Nicole, what do you make of that debate and where the argument in Mississippi might be heading next?
Yeah, I think it's a shame that the Senate killed this bill. It sounds like they're listening to the teachers' lobby, which always resists school choice legislation. The polling speaks for itself. Yeah, I think it's not over. This bill is dead, but there are a couple of options for school choice legislation to be revived. Even in this legislative session, the ESAs could be attached to another education bill. There are a lot of education provisions that the House and the Senate are considering. So the House could try to revive it. Or Governor Tate Reeves, who supports school choice and is a Republican, he could call a special session to try to get these passed. That's what Texas Governor Greg Abbott did in 2023. And though Governor Abbott didn't get his ESAs passed in those special sessions, it did drive the political issue so that he could then endorse challengers later on to the lawmakers who voted against his proposal. So it could be a step forward for ESAs, and the polling clearly shows there's demand for it.
Kim, we'll give you the last word, but do we need Governor Tate Reeves to do a Greg Abbott impression here? It is always tricky sometimes to take on fellow party members, fellow Republicans as a Republican governor. But if the polling is as positive on school choice as it seems to be, maybe you could have a similar sort of situation play out as now we have in Texas, which looks like Greg Abbott got the best of. It looks like he is coming out as the champion of this legislation that is now going to help thousands of families. And maybe that's a position that Tate Reeves could imagine himself in a couple of years down the road.
Well, I sure hope so. My other advice would be that Senate Pro Tem Dean Kirby actually leave his office and speak to somebody who's actually walking on the street. If he couldn't find a single person who supported that bill, my guess is that he wasn't talking to many people beyond the teachers unions in his state. And that is the problem. And this is an almost mirror issue as what you saw in Texas. The House did, pass this, and that shows that there is real support for this in the state House. And the fact that it's being blocked up by a handful of folks that want to take their marching orders from the public education unions in the state. This is an excellent issue for Governor Reeves. And I'd love to see him make a stand here, especially because Mississippi, we've had a lot of talk about Mississippi for reforms that they have done in bumping their reading scores, for instance. And that did not come as a result of not having school choice. School choice is the way to make sure those reforms continue. And so all those Mississippians who are proud of what progress that they have made in some of those basic things, this is the next step. And the state should not be satisfied to just sit back on its haunches and say, oh, well, we did that one thing. As you can see, this is sweeping the nation, and Mississippi is getting left behind.
Thank you, Kim and Nicole. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.